Our series Earth 365 focuses on issues that affect our world year-round. This morning, the important role of, get this, oysters, yep, oysters, in the health of our oceans and our seas, too. The reefs where oysters grow are one of the planet's most at-risk marine habitats. Just in Florida, more than 70% of oyster reefs have disappeared in the last century, but one group is trying to reverse that decline near Pensacola. Mark Strassman brings us a story of what you could call a marine rebirth.
Growing a 3-inch oyster, traditionally a wild oyster, 3 inches takes 3 years.
Pascal Gibson, a commercial fisherman, grew up on these waters off Florida's panhandle. Its oysters used to feed his family. That stopped a decade ago.
Zero industry today.
Nothing.
Nothing. No commercial harvest of wild oysters.
Oysters matter. We eat them. They're an estuary's cleaning crew. One adult oyster filters 50 gallons a day. Oyster beds break waves, protect shorelines from erosion, and create habitats for fish, crabs, and shrimp. But for commercial fishermen, Florida's Gulf Coast is no longer their oyster.
What we didn't see is oyster habitat.
Ann Birch works for the Nature Conservancy, a global conservation group steering a multi-million-dollar project to resurrect oysters here.
Clearly, everything was in rough shape.
Yes, and the oil spill only enhanced it.
Day 44, the latest attempt to contain the spill hits a new snag, and the oil spreads ever closer to Florida.
Crude oil gushed like a gaping wound into the Gulf for nearly 5 months in 2010. And I remember watching it bleed ashore.
All this oil, this is so heavy I can barely lift it, is part of a 16-mile slick that currents out here in the Gulf are now pushing to land.
BP was found criminally and civilly liable. The company had to fund a $20 billion compensation fund for affected states like Florida. $13 million of that paid to restore these oyster reefs, even though oil never reached these waters. Late last year, cranes on barges began building oyster reefs. No one could guarantee the oysters would give these waters a second chance. Oyster larvae need something to cling to, like rocks, then grow on top of each other. Think oyster condos.
This is exactly what we want to see.
At low tide, Birch and I waded out to one of the 33 new reefs. They stretch almost 7 miles.
This is a rock from one of the restored oyster reefs that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 oysters already settled on it.
These oysters will be for habitats, not harvesting. No commercial fishing. About that, Pascal Gibson says there was zero community pushback.
I don't want to see the place I grew up, where I still make a living today, go away.
Already noticing a big difference.
Already noticing a big difference.
As soon as next summer, Gibson hopes commercial fishermen will see fish in greater numbers here. Conservation is a long game. Evaluating meaningful progress here will take years.
Do you see some poetic justice that this environmental restoration is the outgrowth of an environmental disaster?
Well, certainly, it is really important to use that money in the way that will restore the system that was harmed.
Maybe for the first time, building coastal condos means environmental progress. For CBS Mornings, Mark Strassman, Santa Rosa County, Florida.